The security guard was getting impatient. He had told the man in the wheelchair to leave 3 times already, but the man wouldn't move. He just sat there, outside the NBC studios in Burbank, his empty pant legs folded neatly beneath him, holding a photograph in his trembling hands. A photograph of Dean Martin torn from a magazine, wrinkled from being held too many times. 4 hours. The man had been sitting there for 4 hours in the California sun, refusing water, refusing to leave, refusing to accept that Dean Martin wasn't going to come out to meet some random crippled guy off the street. What the guard didn't know, what nobody knew yet, was that in less than 30 minutes, Dean Martin would walk through those studio doors, see that man in the wheelchair, and do something that would cost him his television show, his NBC contract, and nearly destroy his career. And he wouldn't hesitate for a single second. It was October 1969, and America was tearing itself apart over Vietnam. Every night the news showed body counts, protests, flag-draped coffins. The country was divided in ways it hadn't been since the Civil War. Caught in the middle were the men who had actually fought, the soldiers who came home to a nation that didn't know whether to thank them or spit on them. Most of Hollywood stayed silent on the war. It was too controversial, too dangerous for careers built on broad appeal. Dean Martin was no exception. He wasn't political. He didn't make speeches or attend rallies. He just sang his songs, told his jokes, and gave America an hour of escape every Thursday night on The Dean Martin Show. But on October 23, 1969, the war came to Dean Martin whether he wanted it or not. The man in the wheelchair was named Thomas Andrew Reilly. Tommy to his friends, Sergeant Reilly to the men who had served under him. He was 24 years old, though he looked older now. The war had aged him. The pain had aged him. 6 months earlier, Tommy had been leading a patrol through the jungle near Da Nang when they walked into an ambush. He remembered the explosion, the feeling of flying through the air, the strange sensation of looking down and seeing nothing where his legs used to be. He remembered screaming. He remembered the medic's face, pale and terrified, trying to stop the bleeding. He remembered thinking, very clearly, that he was going to die in this jungle 10,000 miles from home and nobody would ever know what happened to him. But Tommy didn't die. He woke up in a field hospital, then a military hospital in Japan, then Walter Reed in Washington. He spent 4 months learning how to live without legs, learning how to transfer from bed to wheelchair, learning how to look at himself in the mirror without crying, learning how to accept that the life he had planned, the future he had imagined, was gone forever. He was 24 years old, and he would never walk again, never dance at his wedding, never chase his children around a backyard, never be the man he was supposed to be. The one thing that got Tommy through those dark months was music, specifically Dean Martin. His mother had sent him a small transistor radio, and every night in the hospital, Tommy would tune in to whatever station was playing oldies. Whenever Dean Martin came on, whenever that warm, easy voice started singing about amore or memories or standing on a corner watching all the girls go by, Tommy felt something loosen in his chest. For 3 minutes he wasn't a broken soldier in a hospital bed. He was just a guy listening to a song. And that was enough. That was everything. When Tommy was finally discharged, he went home to Bakersfield, California. Home to a mother who couldn't stop crying and a father who couldn't look him in the eye. Home to friends who didn't know what to say, so they said nothing at all. Home to a fiancée who tried to pretend everything was the same, but couldn't hide the pity in her eyes. She left him 3 weeks later. Said she couldn't do this. Couldn't spend her life with half a man. Tommy didn't blame her. He wasn't sure he could spend his life with half a man either. The idea to meet Dean Martin came to him one sleepless night. He was lying in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to Everybody Loves Somebody on his radio, and he thought, I should thank him. I should tell him what his music meant to me. I should let him know that when everything else was dark, his voice was the one light I could hold on to. It was a crazy idea. Dean Martin was a huge star. He didn't meet random fans, especially not disabled veterans who would probably just make him uncomfortable. But Tommy couldn't shake the thought. It became an obsession, a mission, the one thing he had to do before he could figure out what came next. He saved money for 3 months. He took a Greyhound bus from Bakersfield to Los Angeles, his wheelchair stored in the luggage compartment below. He found the NBC studios in Burbank and positioned himself outside the main entrance at 7 a.m. on a Thursday, the day the Dean Martin show taped. And he waited. The first hour wasn't bad. The morning was cool, and Tommy was used to waiting. He had waited in jungles, in foxholes, in hospital beds. The second hour was harder. The sun climbed higher, and the heat started to build. People walked past him, some glancing curiously, most ignoring him entirely. Nobody asked if he needed help. Nobody asked why he was there. He was invisible in his wheelchair, just another piece of sidewalk furniture. By the third hour, the security guard had noticed him. The guard was a heavyset man in his 50s, the kind of guy who took his small authority very seriously. He approached Tommy with his hands on his belt. "You can't loiter here, buddy. This is private property." "I'm waiting for Dean Martin. I just want to meet him. Shake his hand. It'll only take a minute." The guard laughed. "Yeah, you and everybody else. Mr. Martin doesn't meet with fans. You need to leave." "I'm not leaving. I came all the way from Bakersfield. I just need 1 minute." "I don't care if you came from the moon. Move along before I call the cops." Tommy didn't move. Something inside him refused to give up. He had come too far. He had survived too much. He wasn't going to let some rent-a-cop take this away from him. The guard called for backup. 2 more security officers came out, younger guys who looked embarrassed to be hassling a man in a wheelchair with no legs. They tried reasoning with Tommy. They tried threatening him. They offered to take a message to Mr. Martin's people. Tommy refused everything. He would wait, as long as it took. By the 4th hour, word had spread inside the studio that there was some crazy vet outside who wouldn't leave. It became a joke in the production office, a nuisance that somebody should deal with but nobody wanted to handle. Nobody wanted to call the police on a legless veteran. It would look bad if it got out. So they just let him sit there, hoping he would eventually give up and go away. Dean Martin arrived at the studio at 2 p.m. for a 4 p.m. taping. He came in through the back entrance as usual, avoiding the main doors where fans sometimes gathered. He was in a good mood. The show was going well. Ratings were strong. NBC was happy. He went to his dressing room, had some coffee, reviewed the script for that night's episode. He didn't know anything about the man in the wheelchair. Nobody had told him. Why would they? It wasn't important. At 3:15 p.m., Dean stepped outside for a cigarette. He liked to smoke behind the studio, where it was quiet. He was standing there, enjoying the California sunshine, when one of the makeup girls came rushing out. "Mr. Martin, I'm sorry to bother you, but I thought you should know. There's a veteran outside, in a wheelchair. He's been there for 4 hours. He just wants to meet you. Security keeps trying to make him leave, but he won't go." Dean took a drag of his cigarette. "A veteran?" "Yes, sir. From Vietnam, I think. He doesn't have any legs." Dean was quiet for a moment. He thought about his son, Dino, who was currently serving in the California Air National Guard. He thought about all the boys over there in the jungle, fighting a war that nobody seemed to understand. He thought about what it must take for a man with no legs to sit outside a TV studio for 4 hours just to shake someone's hand. "Where is he?" "Out front, by the main entrance." Dean dropped his cigarette and crushed it under his heel. "Show me." The makeup girl led him through the studio, past the sets and equipment and crew members who stared as Dean Martin walked by with a look on his face that nobody had seen before. She took him to the front doors, pushed them open, and pointed to the man in the wheelchair sitting alone on the sidewalk. Tommy Reilly looked up and saw Dean Martin walking toward him. For a moment he thought he was hallucinating. The heat, the exhaustion, the emotion. But then Dean Martin was standing right in front of him, blocking the sun, looking down at him with those famous eyes. "I hear you've been waiting for me," Dean said. Tommy opened his mouth, but no words came out. He had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his head. He had planned exactly what he would say. But now that it was happening, everything disappeared. He just sat there, clutching his wrinkled photograph, tears streaming down his face. Dean knelt down so they were at eye level. He didn't seem to notice the security guards watching, the crew members gathering at the doors. He just looked at Tommy like he was the only person in the world. "What's your name, son?" Tommy. Tommy Reilly. Sergeant Tommy Reilly. I was with the 1st Marine Division. Da Nang." Dean nodded slowly. "Thank you for your service, Sergeant Reilly." I mean that. What you did over there, what you sacrificed, it means everything. I just wanted to meet you, Tommy managed. Your music, it got me through the hospital. When everything was dark, when I wanted to give up, I would listen to your songs and I could breathe again. I know that sounds crazy. It doesn't sound crazy at all. I came all the way from Bakersfield. I just wanted to shake your hand, to say thank you. That's all. Dean reached out and took Tommy's hand. But he didn't shake it. He held it. Firmly, warmly, like he was holding on to something precious. Tommy, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. Have you ever been on television? Tommy let out a confused laugh. No, sir. Never. Dean smiled. Well, that's about to change. We're taping a show in 45 minutes. I want you to be on it. I want you to come on stage, sit next to me, and tell America what you just told me. Can you do that? Tommy stared at him. You want me on your show? That's exactly what I want. These people need to see you. They need to hear your story. They need to understand what you boys are going through over there. I'm not dressed for television, I'm just in my regular clothes. And my chair, it's old, it's not. Dean waved his hand. Don't worry about any of that. You come as you are. That's the whole point. He stood up and turned to the security guards, who were watching with open mouths. Gentlemen, this is Sergeant Tommy Reilly of the United States Marine Corps. He's my guest today. I want you to treat him like he's the president of the network. Is that clear? Dean wheeled Tommy through the studio himself, past the executives who tried to stop him, past the producers who warned him about liability, past the lawyers who talked about releases and permissions. Dean ignored all of them. This man waited 4 hours to meet me, Dean said to anyone who got in his way. He gave his legs for this country. The least I can do is give him 15 minutes of my show. A senior NBC executive named Howard Caldwell cornered Dean outside his dressing room. Dean, you can't do this. The sponsors will go crazy. We have contracts, obligations. There are procedures for booking guests. Dean looked at him with cold eyes. Howard, that man out there lost both his legs fighting for this country. He sat outside your studio for 4 hours in a wheelchair, and not one person in this building had the decency to help him. Now I'm putting him on my show. If you have a problem with that, you can fire me. Dean, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. In fact, I'm being more reasonable than I've ever been. That kid gave everything he had. What have you given, Howard? What have any of us given? Caldwell had no answer. At 4 p.m., the Dean Martin Show began taping in front of a live studio audience. The first half hour went according to script. Dean sang his songs, introduced his guests, traded jokes with the audience. Everything was normal. Then, during a commercial break, the stage crew wheeled Tommy Reilly onto the set. The audience fell silent. They saw the wheelchair. They saw the empty pant legs. They saw the young face that had aged beyond its years. And they didn't know how to react. Dean walked over to Tommy and stood beside him. When the cameras came back on, he put his hand on Tommy's shoulder. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce you to someone special. This is Sergeant Tommy Reilly. He served with the 1st Marine Division in Vietnam. 6 months ago, he was leading his men through the jungle when he stepped on a landmine. He lost both of his legs. He's 24 years old. The audience was completely silent. Tommy came to the studio today because he wanted to meet me. He sat outside for 4 hours in his wheelchair, in the sun, because nobody would let him in. He came all the way from Bakersfield just to shake my hand and say thank you. Dean paused, his voice catching slightly. But I'm the one who should be saying thank you. I'm the one who should be sitting outside his door waiting for a chance to shake his hand. He turned to Tommy. Sergeant Reilly, I want you to tell these good people what you told me. About the music. About getting through the hospital. Tommy looked at the audience, at the cameras, at the millions of Americans who would see this. And he found his voice. When I was lying in that hospital bed, I wanted to die. I'm not going to lie about that. I looked at what was left of my body and I couldn't see any reason to keep going. I was 24 years old and my life was over. He paused, gathering himself. But every night I would turn on my radio and I would hear Mr. Martin singing. And for a few minutes I wasn't in that hospital. I wasn't in pain. I was just a guy listening to a song, and somehow that was enough to get me through one more night, and then one more, and that. Tommy looked at Dean, tears streaming down his face. I don't know if I'm going to be okay. I don't know what my life is going to look like. But I know that I'm alive. And part of the reason I'm alive is because of this man's music, so I came here today to say thank you. Not just from me, but from all the guys over there who are listening to the same songs, holding on to the same hope, trying to make it through one more night. The audience erupted. Not applause, not cheers, but something deeper. Some people were crying. Some were standing. Some were sitting in stunned silence, confronted with the reality of a war that had seemed so distant. Dean sat down next to Tommy. You know what I think? I think America needs to hear more stories like yours. I think we've been so busy arguing about whether this war is right or wrong that we've forgotten about the men who are actually fighting it. He looked directly into the camera. I'm not going to tell you what to think about the war. That's not my job. But I am going to tell you what to think about men like Tommy Reilly. These boys are heroes, every single one of them. And if we can't agree on anything else in this country, we should at least agree on that. The segment ran for 18 minutes. Unscripted, unplanned, unprecedented. When the taping ended, the studio audience gave Tommy a 5-minute standing ovation. The fallout was immediate. Before the show even aired, NBC executives were in emergency meetings. Sponsors were threatening to pull advertising. Howard Caldwell came to Dean's dressing room with an ultimatum. The sponsors want the segment cut. If we air it as is, we lose 3 major advertisers. Millions of dollars, Dean. Dean poured himself a drink. So cut it. Caldwell looked relieved. You agree? I didn't say that. I said you can cut it. But if you do, I walk. Tonight. And I'll hold a press conference tomorrow morning explaining exactly why. You can't do that. You have a contract. So sue me. Dean set down his glass. Howard, that kid lost his legs for this country. He sat outside your studio for 4 hours and nobody helped him. And you want to cut his story because it might cost you some advertising revenue? It's not that simple. Actually, it is. It's exactly that simple. You either air the segment, or I'm done. Not just with this show, with NBC, with television. I'll go back to Vegas and sing in casinos for the rest of my life. The segment aired. Every second of it. Thousands of letters poured into NBC, most praising Dean for giving voice to the forgotten veterans of Vietnam. Newspapers ran stories about Tommy Reilly and his 4-hour wait. For a moment, it seemed like Dean had done something important, but sponsors don't forget, and neither do networks. Over the next 6 months, Dean's relationship with NBC deteriorated. Budget cuts were made to his show. Guest bookings became harder. The message was clear. Dean Martin had crossed a line. In March 1970, NBC informed Dean that his contract would not be renewed. The official reason was creative differences. The real reason was Tommy Reilly and those 18 unscripted minutes. Dean didn't fight it. Fine, he said. I was getting bored anyway. But he never forgot Tommy Reilly. And Tommy never forgot him. They stayed in touch over the years. Dean helped Tommy get into a vocational program, paid for his apartment when money was tight, called him every Christmas without fail. When Tommy got married in 1975 to a nurse he had met at the VA hospital, Dean flew to Bakersfield for the wedding. He sang at the reception. He danced with Tommy's mother. He gave a toast that made everyone cry. I've sung for presidents, Dean said, raising his glass. I've performed for kings and queens and movie stars. But nothing I've ever done means as much to me as being here today, watching this man marry the love of his life. Tommy Reilly taught me something important. He taught me that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and showing up anyway. It's about sitting outside a TV studio for 4 hours when everyone tells you to leave. It's about believing that your story matters, even when the world tries to convince you it doesn't. He looked at Tommy, sitting in his wheelchair next to his bride. You matter, Tommy. You always did. And I'm proud to call you my friend. When Dean Martin died on Christmas Day 1995, Tommy Reilly was one of the last people he called. The conversation was brief. Dean was weak, his voice barely a whisper. That day at the studio, Dean said. When I walked outside and saw you sitting there. That was one of the best days of my life. Not because I did anything special, but because you reminded me why any of this matters. The music, the shows, all of it. It matters because it can reach people. It can help them through the darkness. You taught me that, Tommy. Tommy couldn't speak. He just held the phone and cried. Take care of yourself, Sergeant, Dean said. And don't let anyone tell you that you can't do something. You just sit there and wait. Eventually, they'll have to open the door. Dean Martin died the next morning. Tommy Reilly lived for another 23 years, passing away in 2018 at the age of 73. He had 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and a life that he had once thought was impossible. At his funeral, his eldest son read a letter that Tommy had written years earlier. I was 24 years old when I lost my legs. I was ready to give up. I had no hope, no future, no reason to keep fighting. And then a man I had never met walked out of a television studio, knelt down beside my wheelchair and treated me like I mattered. Dean Martin saved my life that day. Not because he put me on his show, not because he got fired for standing up for me, but because he saw me. He really saw me. In a world that wanted me to disappear, he made me visible. The letter ended. If you remember nothing else about my life, remember this. Dean Martin asked me one question that day outside the studio. He asked, "What's your name, son?" That's all it takes. That's all any of us need. Someone to stop, look us in the eye, and ask our name. Dean Martin did that for me. Now it's your turn. Find someone who's waiting. Find someone who's invisible. And ask them their name. That's the Dean Martin story that matters. Not the songs, not the movies, not the Rat Pack mythology. But the man who walked out of a studio, knelt beside a wheelchair, and asked a simple question. What's your name, son? That's all it took. That's all it ever takes.